China now has such economic leverage over the world with control over renewables. It is now the undisputed power when it comes to renewables. And I think China loves that idea of being the dominant leader.
If you travel across China today, you'll see a country undergoing one of the biggest energy transformations in history. The boom in wind and solar power is unprecedented in scale and speed. No nation on Earth can match it. But at the same time, China is still building coal-powered plants, the dirtiest type of energy there is on a massive scale. It's also producing around a third of the planet's greenhouse gases. So here's the real question. Can the world's biggest polluter change in time to avoid the worst effects of climate change? That's our climate question from the BBC World Service with Greer Jackson and Jordan Dunbar.
Laura Bicker is the BBC's China correspondent. Hi, Laura.
Hello, nice to be back on the programme. How are you two doing?
Very well. You're joining us from Beijing.
I am in the midst of winter. We've had freezing temperatures over the last few weeks, so it's nice to be warm in the studio.
Yeah, and you've done some great reporting, haven't you? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, we've travelled right from north to south across China because one of the things I really wanted to look at is how China's renewable revolution is looking on the ground. And I'd seen some of it for myself in my previous travels, but I really wasn't prepared for just how much China's landscapes changed. And these are utterly amazing scenes. There's one point in the train journey as we were heading north where you saw the tracks of the train just winding through, and each single carriage of the train was filled with coal. And in the background, you had the smokestacks of the old coal plant. And then on the hillsides, on the ridges, you've got these huge wind turbines turning away, and then these miles of solar panels. And that's just in one province, that's just in Inner Mongolia. And then as you head south in Yunnan, as you cycle along the side of the Red River, and by the way, it is deep red because of the colour of the clay, you see these kind of panels and they almost look like scales on the hill. The hillside's so steep and these panels are placed right on the edge. But I think as I've travelled right across from north to south, one of the things I found is that not everyone is embracing this dramatic shift. Back in Inner Mongolia, when I was up in the north, I was speaking to the farmers who look after their flocks of sheep. They farm these sheep for their cashmere and merino wool. And they were telling me, I mean, honestly, they were laughing at me because I was freezing. And they're turning their collars up as this icy blast comes from the north. And they're saying to me, no, we see the climate changing. We believe that this part of the world is getting warmer and wetter. So I went away and looked at China's figures for this area. And indeed, the temperature has increased there by 2 Celsius, according to China's meteorological figures. And the rainfall has also increased. So they see the need for these panels. And also, they believe, and scientists have shown that it does work to an extent, that these solar panels are managing to hold back the advance of the desert. Overgrazing in this area has caused real problems. It's caused the advance of these sand dunes. And what they're able to do, because the solar panels actually offer some shade, the grasslands grow underneath the panels. And actually, they're managing to put the flock of sheep within the solar panels themselves. So you've got these sheep and goats munching away in the middle of this solar installation. And from the air, when you fly the drone overhead, many of them have been put in kind of, what shall I say, shapes. So some are shaped like pandas. Obviously, it's China. This one is shaped like a horse to show the stealth and the speed of China's transition. But you asked what the locals think. Further down south in Yunnan, we went to someone who used to grow green tea, and made quite a decent living from it. And there, his crop has been ripped out in place of these panels. The place, so basically he rented the land from the tea company, and the tea company has now rented it to the energy company. Now, obviously, we asked both for comment and they declined. But this was a farmer who believes he's losing out on a living. He doesn't understand why there's a need for those panels there. So there are very dissenting views on both sides.
Laura, once again, this is a mega project in China we've talked about mega dams in another episode. This is a complete physical transformation of the landscape. How have the Chinese government been able to do this when so many other countries struggle with a fraction of installing solar and renewables?
So this is a plan. This is a grand plan right from the start. So way back in 2012, when President Xi came to power, he pushed what he called new productive forces. China was good at manufacturing. Back then, it was your T-shirts, your electronics, your TVs. That is what China sent to the world. What China has done since then is moved to what, as I said, President Xi calls his three productive forces. So these are batteries, electric vehicles, and solar panels. So what they've done is they've put state subsidies, offered loans to many companies. And in return, what's happened is manufacturing has scaled up. And I mean, we are talking huge levels of production. Now, that in itself has caused a problem because you've got basically a crisis of overcapacity. And I think some figures from Reuters in the last year has shown that around 60% of jobs have been lost in these solar panel industries. So China is now having to scale back. Now, I do not see that China will stop producing solar panels. That's just not going to happen. But what I would say is that their overproduction, their overcapacity is now going elsewhere. Emerging economies across Southeast Asia, across Africa, they have made solar panels a cheap alternative. And that's why we've seen so much of this scale right across China. And especially within the last few years since 2023, we're looking at a massive scale, considering, if you look way back at 2010, they hardly had a solar installation across the country. Now they've installed more solar panels across the country than any other part of the world combined. In fact, I think one analyst gave me the figure. In May last year, they were installing 100 solar panels a second. Just let that sink in for a moment. Can you imagine what that looks like right across the country?
What's in it for China, Laura? Why are they doing this?
So there are a couple of reasons. First of all, they want to be I think President Xi believes that he wants his country to be in a good position in the future. However, when it comes to China, this is not really just about lowering carbon emissions. This is also about ensuring that the lights stay on. There's a real fear in China that they cannot power themselves, that they don't have enough energy. Now, when they were a manufacturing powerhouse, they've had to import oil, they've had to import gas, and also they found that coal was the cheapest alternative. So coal has really powered this economic juggernaut for so long. And they knew that that was not a source that they could use forever. President Xi has decided, look, what we have to do is we have to make sure that we're self-sufficient energy-wise. I think the other reason, if you look back to some of the speeches before 2008, before China hosted the Olympics, you could see a real concern about the way international media in particular was highlighting the smog around Beijing, around the capital, around elsewhere. And I think there's been a real worry about what that is doing to people's health. And so that also has fueled this kind of push towards renewables. But I think now what this country can see is with this power, with this dominance comes leverage. And we've seen that over the United States in the last year. China now has such economic leverage over the world with control over renewables. It is now the undisputed power when it comes to renewables. I spoke to Li Shaw from the Asia Society. One of the things he told me, he says, the others are being left in the dust. There is only one global player now. And I think China loves that idea of being the dominant leader.
Yeah, but isn't there a contradiction here, Laura? Because yes, it's a renewable superpower, but it's also building all this new coal capacity. And you saw that play out when you were on the ground in China, didn't you?
So we were in a province called Anhui, which is a central province. And there, the contrasting Chinas are so evident. In one side, you have, this old coal plant, this new coal plant being built side by side, smoke billowing from it. And then in front of it is a lake. Now, at first, it looks like just any ordinary lake. This isn't a lake. This was one of Asia's largest underground coal mines, and it's just simply collapsed. And in it, it's taken thousands of homes, villages being swept away. The local government has given people, thousands of pounds of relocation. They've moved them to new fancy flats, but many of the older generation just didn't want to move. This was their home. And so we found two elderly, they're both in their 70s, chopping wood to keep warm. And just have to emphasize, they're chopping wood to keep warm when on one side, they've got the coal-fired power station. And on the other, on the lake, they've built one of the world's largest solar farms. So they've turned this environmental crisis into an opportunity. But the fact that this insatiable need for energy, this insatiable need for coal, has at one point caused irreversible environmental harm and an irreversible human harm. This is a couple who've lost everything, and they said their house just went one day and they didn't manage to save anything. They don't want to move because they can't get a job where they are, they can't earn. And at least there they can grow crops to survive. So in many ways, even though China is pushing forward with this renewables, I think there is still perhaps work to be done in China to ensure that every single person benefits from the renewable revolution.
And you're talking about floating solar panels.
It's really really surreal to say, because you can't really tell the difference between the solar panels and the water, especially on a smoggy day. The only reason we knew, or you could see from the ground, is because there was a boat going around checking all the solar panels and making sure they were okay. And then they've also got a floating rice paddy on there too. So what they've tried to do is, as I said, create this opportunity in the face of a crisis. And the local government is actually one of the few people in my whole time in China who actually returned our calls. And they said that they were working hard to try to restore the environment in Anhui. And yes, they have built new coal-fired power stations, but they're complying with local government guidelines, and they're trying to ensure the phase out of this over a period of time.
If we zoom out a little bit then, Laura, we can see they're building massive amounts of renewable, also lots of coal. Where are we on that sort of graph, if you like? Are emissions going up? Are they plateauing? Are they going down? What's the big picture?
So this is the other thing everybody's watching out for. So at the moment, right at the end of 2025, carbon emissions were flatlining. So it's beginning to kind of raise the question, have China's emissions peaked? So that's what we're looking at now. And I think especially as we're coming out of winter, where we've got this kind of peak usage of coal and of fuel and of energy, as we're coming out of this winter, I think experts will be poring over the figures to see from here on in throughout 2026 if emissions start to drop. Now, flatlining is one thing, but I think when I spoke to the experts, they said it's still too early to say that emissions have peaked. It's still too early, that they may start decline, but there is some hope there.
So you mentioned global green superpower, and you've mentioned the plan to build more renewables. You know, it's a real government priority. How does that work with the other Chinese plans of, a goal of peak carbon emission by 2030 or carbon neutrality by 2060, if they're still building coal power plants?
That is what we're watching closely, because I've spoken to a number of experts on this. They are still building coal plants, but there is a belief now that China's increase in energy is being met by renewable sources. And at the speed and the scale that they're installing it, it seems that there is a hope that coal can eventually, over the next few years, be replaced by renewables. Now, is it going to happen overnight? No, but what we've seen from the speed from just 2020 to now, experts believe it is possible. I think there was a lot of disappointment in President Xi's announcement about carbon emissions, because to try to reduce them by 2030. I think many felt that China wasn't going far enough, that China was capable of more. But the problem for Beijing is it likes to underpromise and overdeliver. It doesn't like to look as if it's missing targets. So many analysts believe that that is what Beijing's doing at the moment, that it will start to use its dominance in renewables to overtake the coal power over the next few years. Now, there's a big report that comes out in China in March. It's called the Work Report. And that's what everybody's got their eye on, because that will maybe give us a few more clues about how they will do this.
Laura, I'm wondering what the message is from the Chinese government, because you've mentioned economics there and building them. Do they talk about one solar panel per second is being built and that's helping to fight climate change? Or are the other things, secure energy, jobs, are they mentioned first?
So secure energy and jobs is always mentioned first. I think the real worry here in China at the moment is that the economy has slowed down. The economy here is facing major challenges. This was, I mentioned it's a manufacturing powerhouse. We're looking at a nation of farmers that, back in the 1980s that have really turned this country into the world's second largest economy. So when officials are kind of putting forward this message, it's always in the case of this is good for our economy, this is good for our economy. There are major economic challenges within China, and they include basically a slowdown in manufacturing. They include a very high youth unemployment rate, and they include a house price crisis. So I think when it comes to those three, that's what's on people's minds. So it's less about carbon emissions and it's more about what does this mean for us?
As in, it helps with the jobs, the employment, secure energy, and the co-benefit, as they say, is it's also helping to bring down the emissions.
I think if you live somewhere where smog has been part of your life from the moment you were born, I think seeing blue skies more and more really has an effect. I think I spoke to someone months ago about what Chinese people want now, because obviously you've seen in the past they wanted prosperity. This is a country that within one generation have gone from barely enough to eat to lifting 800 million reportedly out of poverty to becoming the world's second largest economy. So what do the Chinese people want now? And one of the things this person who knows China well, who knows the Chinese government well, turned to me and says, what we want, Laura, is clean water and clean skies. So all of a sudden, what Chinese officials, what Chinese leaders are looking at is that basically people don't just want to be rich anymore. They also want a clean environment to live in.
What people want, very important. But on the international stage, we have these targets, right? And I think I read that in order to meet our internationally agreed targets of ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius and avoid the worst effects of climate change, emissions have to be cut by a lot more than what China's pledged. Climate Action Tracker say that their current policies are highly insufficient and would lead to a world that's 4 degrees Celsius warmer. We've talked about peak emissions, but what does that look like in the broader picture?
So many differing figures are coming in. Is China on target? Is it slipping behind its targets currently, despite all of this renewable energy? I think when you speak to experts, what they tell you is what's going wrong is basically ensuring that this renewable energy gets to the grid, ensuring that they're putting these projects in places where you can get enough sunlight. And also the fact that coal is still at the heart. I mean, it produces around half of all China's energy still currently. That's a lot. So while that is still at the heart of their energy production, and I have to say homes, a large number of homes, especially across northern China where it's cold, use the cheap form of coal. So they're slipping on their targets. But if they manage to continue at this pace, if they manage to perhaps make sure that all of their projects are installed and plugged into the grid, that could change. But there's a lot to do, and especially when it comes to people's homes, because we talked about that, I certainly hear the blue skies that are more prevalent across Beijing. But on the edge of Beijing is a province called Hebei. And there are a number of pensioners there that have been warned, do not burn coal. And they were given gas heaters instead of coal heaters. Now, gas is really expensive, and they're facing, bills of around £600 a month. That is like 3 times the amount of a pension. There's no way many can afford it. And here in Beijing's backyard, we're watching pensioners freeze rather than afford their heating bills because they're being told not to burn coal. So you can see if you implement policies too quickly, if you move too fast, how it can affect real people's lives.
Yeah, I bet. And we've talked about China being a green superpower, that dominance it has over the production of renewables like wind and solar. Some people see that as a threat, but hasn't it also enabled lots of benefits to people across the world?
So the threat, if you speak to the likes of some Western countries, is real fear that China's overcapacity, this overproduction, it means they'll just have all of these solar panels dumped on Europe and dumped on those who don't really want it. I think there are also those who feel that at this time they don't have a chance. There's no competition here. But in terms of if you're an emerging economy, if you're in Africa, if you're in Southeast Asia, and I've traveled right across Cambodia and Laos, and these rooftop solar panels are lifesavers. They are powering people's homes. They are giving light and electricity where there was none. And they're easy and quick to install. So all of a sudden, industrial revolutions were formed on coal, whether it was the United Kingdom or whether it was China. Coal fed all of these kind of industrial heartlands. Now, because of China's production of solar panels, because China's now driven the cost of those down, it could become a possibility that other nations could become industrial nations using China's solar power.
We've talked about the economic, the technological kind of power that this gives China around the world. But what message do you think it sends globally in terms of climate leadership? We've seen the US, world's biggest economy at times, it really steps up. It's a global leader. Other times, like at the minute, it's stepped back. What message is China sending by this huge renewable splurge?
So I don't think China so far has shown the willingness to lead the climate fight. I think it's shown a willingness to lead a fight in which it benefits in terms of economically. I think it's not shown an ability yet to step up on a platform and lead the way for other countries in the terms of flying a flag for, lower carbon emissions, flying the flag for ensuring that climate targets are met. What it has done from discussions when it comes to likes of COP is that China plays quite a key part there. It's still signed up to the Paris Agreement. It takes those agreements seriously and it likes to be part of a wider global community. But so far, China hasn't wanted to lift the mantle and run with it.
So we started this programme by asking if renewables are changing China and the world, and it sounds like the answer is a big resounding yes. So Laura Bicker, thank you so much for helping us answer that question.
Lovely to talk to you both.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the BBC World Service YouTube channel so you don't miss a thing. And if you've got a climate question for us, comment it below and we'll answer it in a future show. From Jordan Dunbar and me, Greer Jackson, we'll see you next time.